Lynn Johansson's involvement in the world of international standards began in 1993. She was invited to join the Canadian Mirror Committee to ISO TC 207 as a result of her company's success in applying quality management principles and philosophies to manage the contamination faced by the glass container industry in the early days of curbside recycling programs. Lynn, take it away.
Thank you, Laura. So, I'm sure that you've all heard the classic jokes about the importance of size, including the one where a woman consults her doctor for advice in a frustrating search to find a satisfying lover. He advises that she find a man using the size of his feet as the comparison, which he tells her is a standard measure. She searches the street of London and comes upon a man in an unemployment line with the largest shoes she's ever seen. She plans for a night of wild abandon. He awakens to find himself alone in the hotel room with 100 pounds on the night table and a note that reads, "Thank you for last night. Please take the money and buy yourself a pair of shoes that fit." Size does matter, even when it comes to standards. For this discussion, I'm going to draw upon my 25 years of experience in the ISO management system standards world. I'm sure that most of this audience would be quite familiar with these standards. I will add that while much of my experience has been in the field of environmental management, I spent a lot of time learning how the world of standards operates. Before I get into the details about why standards fail small business, let me be clear on what I define as a small business, because there is no universal agreement on a definition of small business. And it's certainly true that definitions change depending on who is doing the defining or classifying. For this presentation, I'm referring to legally constituted employer businesses with fewer than 100 employees. In Canada, this represents about 98% of the business population, which includes over 1.14 million companies. This does not include sole proprietorships, which constitute another 1.2 million companies in Canada. It's important to understand that 95% of all Canadian businesses have fewer than 50 employees. That's still well over 1.1 million companies. Essentially, the smaller the company, that is, the fewer the number of employees, the greater the representation they have in a national economy. The critical point here is that, according to small business experts, companies with fewer than 50 people operate informal management systems. I'm going to return to this fact in a few minutes to explain why this is significant to the world of standards. These stats and the culture of small business are important facts in the discussion that follows. To be clear, Canada is not unique in this situation. According to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, microenterprise, that is, companies with fewer than 10 employees, dominate the business landscape. They account for 70 to 95% of all businesses. They are the primary employers in a nation. They account for 70% of jobs on average. They are the source of information. They are the economic backbone of almost all national economies, representing between 45% and 60% of GDP. They are the human threads that weave the social fabric of every community and hold it together. They don't move to Mexico or Spain or Malaysia when energy costs skyrocket. Their feet are firmly grounded in their community. At the same time, collectively, the actions of small business have a significant impact on the major environmental health issues of nations. According to a report by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, 65% of the cost of environmental externalities is tied to small and medium-sized businesses. This reflects the impacts and effects that small business have on the health and wealth of a nation. This fact is echoed in other surveys and research efforts. To me, this means that no country will be able to evolve to a sustainable future without their involvement. What is also critical is how this involvement is solicited. In research conducted by the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, or CFIB, by far the strongest motivation for small business to make changes in their place of business for the environment is because the owner believes it is the right thing to do, and they believe they can do a better job. Personal views rate the highest at 83% or higher. And it is worth noting that this belief has held consistent in 3 surveys spanning 25 years. Regardless of the size, location, or type of business, the owner's personal views are the most significant motivation for making changes to their business. And this far outweighs any other reason. Efforts to influence behavior on environmental issues must take this into consideration if they're going to successfully engage small business. So what does this really mean? For small business, better environmental management, it's personal. It's not profit-driven. It's not a question of reputation, nor is it driven by customers or employees. Changes do have to be considerate of cash flow, as small business does not have the deeper pockets nor access to capital that larger firms have. Payback has to be in shorter time periods, not years, unless it is supported by external sources. Given the plethora of small business, no matter what lens you use, the involvement of small business matters a lot, and we ignore them at our peril. So how does the current system of standardization fail small business? Let's examine how this happens using 14001 as a case study. Environmental management systems were intended to address the needs of any type or small or size of organization anywhere in the world. In Clause 1, where the scope of the international standard states, the international standard is applicable to any organization regardless of size and type, and so on. While there are variations of this statement in the scope statements of other ISO management system standards, the takeaway message is fairly consistent, and that ISO standards are intended to serve as one size fits all. What it says and what occurs in what follows in the standard and the system that supports it are 2 different things. So I beg to differ. I know from listening to owners and managers of small businesses who have heard about ISO standards, they concur. ISO is too onerous, too complicated, and too costly. There's almost no support from small business for ISO, nor in fact does the public recognize ISO as a household brand. Yes, almost anyone can share an exception, but isolated case studies are just that, and typically the small business has received external funding support to be certified. The minute that support dries up, so does their ability to continue the certificate. But let me add that I applaud the efforts of these small businesses who have got certified. To state it simply, ISO has not broken through the glass floor it built, and this floor will remain a barrier between standards and small business for the foreseeable future. While ISO 14001-2004 was seen as less onerous than its big European sister EMAS, adoption is still far less than 1%. Small business owners have told me that ISO 14001-2015 is more of a challenge, not less. The feedback on ISO 14001-2004 was well articulated in a report prepared for the European Union in 2010. It stated that geography, sector differences, national financial situations, and political systems do not appear to have a significant impact on the overall perception of ISO 14001 in particular. Broadly speaking, it's seen as costly and irrelevant to customers. The costs and lack of demand, customers, and legislation seem to overshadow the possibilities for cost reduction. ISO has conducted a number of surveys on small business, as have other institutions. The response is consistent. ISO standards and small business are not on the same page. The European report also summarized the main barriers mentioned by the SMEs interviewed on the challenges to obtain and implement a certified EMS. These are a lack of information, the lengthy time needed to apply, high implementing costs and running costs, no demand from legislation or customers, and other sector standards are more important. Is the only problem that the focus on certified systems? No, but the cost to certify is a major stumbling block. The purpose of an EMS is not to get certified. However, the price point of certification acts as a stop sign, which ends interest for further inquiry on the value of a robust, credible, and reliable EMS. But some of these challenges are perceptual or myth-based. I've encountered the belief in many countries that adopted 14001, or 9001 for that matter, that they can only achieve value if the company certifies. The fact that all ISO management system standards are voluntary and will remain so as long as the international trade laws are in place, these are lost in the opportunities to help small business. While experts in ISO 14001 took specific measures to counter the certify or die mentality, it still exists. In 2002, an ad hoc group of the subcommittee involved in the revision of what was to become the 2004 version clarified in Clause 1 scope that the ISO standard was voluntary, which SC1 accepted unanimously. In fact, it explained, albeit in ISO speak, that there were and still are 4 recognized options. This information has been moved to the introduction in the 2015 version. It states that this international standard is applicable to any organization that wishes to demonstrate conformity with this international standard. It can make its self-determination and self-declaration, or it can seek confirmation of its conformance by parties having an interest in the organization, such as customers, or it can seek confirmation of its self-declaration by a party external to the organization. Or, and the last but not the least certainly, and the most popular still remains, to seek certification and registration of its environmental management system by an external organization. Option 1 notes that the organization can conduct its own audits and self-declare. And I know that some multinationals have gone this route. Option 2 is often an audit conducted by customers or by another division or subsidiary coming in to do the audit. Options 1 and 2 are not considered as independent of the organization, whereas options 3 and 4 are categorized as independent. Option 3 was based originally on the EnviroReady report. The report applies an international standard that operates under the accounting profession, which is conducted by specially trained professional accountants. They're known as ERAs. They conduct an OP, agreed upon procedures, on an environmental management system. The EnviroReady report was designed to address the needs of small business in countries where the International Federation of Accountants has members, which largely parallels all the member countries in ISO. The report is not designed to provide oversight to high-risk entities. It provides a lower-cost option to low-risk entities with limited budgets. It broadens the potential for external oversight. As its target market are companies that cannot afford third-party certification, it complements, but it doesn't compete with certification. ISO was very helpful in the design of this approach, as were the Canadian and International Accounting Associations. Option 3 is now used to recognize other external auditing options. For example, external audits can also be provided by auditors who have earned the designation referred to as the environmental professional, Environmental Management Systems Lead Auditor, or EP/EM/SLA. This offers the Canadian and US market another approach, which again broadens the options available to the market for 14001. The designation was also developed through the combined efforts of ECO Canada and the Auditing Association of Canada. Option 4 refers to third-party certification, which ISO has further clarified as being accredited certification. However, these conformity assessment options do not help with the diffusion of 14001, nor do they help inform organizations, big or small, public or private, about the value of a management system. In traveling to about 85 countries since 1997, I hear the same message over and over again. There are barriers to adoption that continue. Some of them are real, and some of them are compounded by perceptions and misunderstandings. Let's consider briefly some of the other barriers. Getting information from small business is also a challenge. The technical committee responsible for environmental management and governments and academia have investigated the challenges of small business from a number of times. Many of these efforts include market surveys through the national member bodies and the respective mirror committees. Basically, the same questions get asked to the same stakeholder groups to generate the same answers. Many of the investigations in my mind are designed to fail, for they start by targeting certified companies. They do not represent the 95% of the informally managed organizations we need to communicate with the value of a robust, credible, and reliable EMS. I have to say, though, that communicating with small business and stakeholder engagement in general is not one of the fortes of the standards world. The expectation by some in the standards development world is that companies await news about standards with bated breath. Not so. There's nothing sexy about standards, despite my initial attempt at humor. EMS managers do not wait for news of new or revised standards with the same enthusiasm that ardent fans have when they hover around the stage door for an ingenue to appear so they can get a glimpse and, if lucky, an autograph. Of course, these days it's more likely to be a selfie. So, why does ISO fail small business? Or what is actually the root cause? Have you thought about this? Is this an issue for your business? If you're watching this presentation, it probably is. I want to come back to the top 5 reasons listed in the European research and add some of my insight from my own research and experience. The first barrier is the lack of awareness or lack of information pertaining to ISO standards. In the early days of standards for environmental management systems, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business posed a question about the awareness of sustainable development and ISO 14001 to their 107,000 members. While 86% of the respondents believed that sustainable development practices made it possible to grow the economy and protect the environment at the same time, 73% had not even heard of ISO. If I remember correctly, there were about 10,000 respondents, so roughly 7,300 small businesses were not familiar with the term ISO 14001. According to CFIB at that time, this represents a huge opportunity for governments to take the initiative on disseminating information to small and medium-sized firms regarding non-mandatory solutions that could help improve their environmental standards. By and large, this remains an untapped opportunity for governments, and I suspect not only in Canada, but in other places and related agencies. Is this a place for auditors to help? It would be interesting to learn how active other national and lower governments have been in promoting the benefits of voluntary standards in non-traditional ways. Other countries no doubt have similar awareness issues and opportunities to educate their small business sectors. If any of you have something that your country is doing that is innovative, I'd love to hear from you. In the past year, there's been a move to balance regulations and voluntary standards as part of a response to what we call the red tape challenge, driven by CFIB in Canada. A red tape challenge outlines the costs of regulation and includes estimates of those that do not add value to society. They're just boat anchors undermining productivity. In the environmental field, these regulations do not help improve the environment. According to CFIB's latest research, the annual cost of all regulations on business in Canada is estimated at $36.2 billion per year, with 1/3 of that, $10 billion, considered to be red tape. Can you imagine what a boon this would be to the Canadian economy if this amount of waste could be eliminated and the funds be redirected towards innovating a greener economy? What would this be in the States or in Europe? If standards were redesigned to be truly useful to small business, this could also be advantageous to the standards industry. If standards were easier to understand and implement, if they were supported by government policies and procurement policies, they could enable a smoother, faster shift to a green economy. To be successful, these efforts need to include a candid discussion to understand the benefits, the costs, and other barriers from the perspective of the small business. I want to reemphasize that 95% of a nation is in the hands of small business, and ask you to remember that the reality under which small businesses operate. You cannot take a big company's tool, scale it down, and think it will work. In 25 years, I've never seen anything that successfully scaled down to meet the needs of small business. You have to design for success. You have to design for small business. Time, or rather the lack of it to apply an EMS, was the next barrier on the list. The saying goes, time is money, but neither one is something of which small business has endless reserves. It takes time for a small business to adopt a formal management system, especially when the task has to be added onto someone else's existing list of duties, which already takes up a full day. Adoption could take up to several years, which represents a longer investment period than most small businesses can afford. The lag time being achieving an EMS and getting the rewards and recognition for doing so does not help the matter. While the adoption of management standards is still not front and center for most small businesses, product-related standards are perceived to have a shorter link to market feedback. I do not have evidence that this is a big barrier, but the report did list other standards as having more market relevance for small businesses as the fifth barrier. However, the third barrier on the list was the high cost of adoption and maintenance of a standard. I think I've addressed most of the cost elements already. I have known some smaller companies who have done an elegant job of adoption. They have a sophisticated understanding of EMS, and they know the value that formalizing a management system can bring, even when the market signals do not provide the necessary feedback. They do it for internal benefit. This brings me to the fourth barrier. The market signals are not there. To use the benefit of a fish analogy, the salmon has not made it upstream. The key players in a supply chain, private or public, have not made EMS a supplier preference to the extent that the pressure has been felt in the headwaters of a supply chain. This is both good and bad. It's good in that not enough big companies have a sophisticated understanding of how to ask for an EMS except as a certified system. I've seen the request from some purchasing departments in large companies for a self-certified system, which makes me absolutely quiver, for this is not a term we favor in the ISO world. The lack of understanding of the terms we use in the ISO world is deserving of a separate discussion. The bad news is when government policies or procurement initiatives ask for a certified system, this can actually undermine the credibility of certification. Some companies have even resorted to buying a certificate off the internet, which devolves into a paper chase, and you come home with an empty net. However, these certificates are not backed by a robust, credible, and reliable EMS, and it does disfavor to those in the auditing industry who are doing a good job. These scenarios only serve to undermine the reputation of ISO. I've invested thousands of hours in trying to support the adoption of robust, credible, and reliable EMS. So it was a most unpleasant moment when a significant player in Canada, who advises presidents in the Fortune 500 companies, emphatically told me that ISO 14000 was nothing but an audit scam. Before I move the conversation to what the real value of an EMS is for small business, I want to emphasize for this audience that we need all four conformity assessment options to meet the needs of our markets. But we need each one to be respected. We need to ensure that the seamless transition from one option to the next when needed, so that we can ensure that conformity assessment is valuable and valued by the market. Think of the famous line from the Three Musketeers, all for one and one for all. We need to ensure that ISO is not just for some. So how do we do this? Perhaps it's time to explore what the real value of standards are and what benefits can accrue to supply chains. I want to touch upon what the potential returns are from a robust, credible, and reliable EMS to address things like climate change, smart city initiatives, and blockchain opportunities, but from a small business perspective. I want to talk about the real potential value of an EMS for small business. Set aside for a moment the issues of conforming to specific requirements. Focus on what the presence of a robust, credible, and reliable EMS can offer. I'm going to pull from conversations I've had over the years with policymakers and shapers, financial institutions, small business owners, experts in small business performance, advisors of small business, and experts in systems thinking and systems dynamics. In short, I'm jumping outside of your worldview to share with you a different way of looking at risks and opportunities from the perspective of a small business owner. So, where shall we start? Well, for the moment, let's go to park all the commonly cited benefits that experts use to sell EMS and put them on its side. One of the fundamental benefits that an EMS enables is the opportunity to formalize one's management approach. Remember that 95% of businesses are informally managed. ISO is seen as being geared to those entities that already have a formal management system in place. Why is this point important? Small business experts, not EMS experts, understand that formalizing management leads to productivity improvements. Productivity improvements lead to increases in profitability. As profitability goes up, enhancement in prosperity occur. An EMS presents the opportunity to green productivity. While profitability may not be top of mind for small business owners, cash flow is. However, if you operate profitably, there's a pretty good chance that the challenges of cash flow are reduced. I will not be so foolish as to say that they are eliminated. Having good cash flow, being profitable, can help to reduce stress and open the door to considering other innovations, sharing the wealth and health of small business with others, and this enables eco-prosperity. This can help a small business to be seen as higher value supplier and a respected community member as a consequence of the improvements an EMS can bring. So, how else can an EMS help? Regardless of how one wants to name the phenomenon of climate change, small business is at higher risk from both the environmental impacts and the business effects. Small business lacks the access to capital and resources that large corporations typically have. So they can suffer lasting economic damage as a result of a single extreme weather event. For example, when Hurricane Sandy hit the eastern seaboard in the fall of 2012, about 30% of the small businesses operating in this region were affected to varying degrees by the storm's damaging effects. Indeed, there are various business reports estimating that anywhere from 25 to 40% of all businesses, small businesses, were unable to open their doors again after a major disaster. The median cost of downtime from a small business affected by extreme weather event is $3,000 US per day. Small businesses' physical assets tend to be more concentrated as they operate from one location. A single building or factory could represent most of the book value of a small business, whereas large businesses benefit from greater geographic diversification. The majority of small businesses have not closely analyzed the potential economic losses from extreme weather events or climate-related risks, in part due to the lack of resources to do so. In fact, as noted in the US research, 57% of small businesses have no disaster recovery plan. And for those small businesses that don't have continuity or risk management plans, 90% spend less than 1 day a month preparing and maintaining them. Having an EMS can help small business put these kinds of plans into place. Working with peers to create them can help reduce the costs. It can also help small business with a community understanding of who does what and who can be called upon to cooperate in times of stress and disaster. Given the increasing number of flooding-related events and other natural disasters, many jurisdictions are advising that businesses, as well as householders, need to be ready to survive for 72 hours without government support. At least some of you live in communities that either have experienced such a challenge or you will be before too long. Zurich Insurance reported that 78% of the SMEs they surveyed in 2016 from 13 different countries indicated that heavy rain and droughts were the impacts of concern, whereas material damage and business interruptions were expected to have greater effects on their businesses, with the latter two seen as being the more difficult risks to protect against. It seems perverse to me that despite the fact that nature always wins against humankind, it's the devices we create that pose sometimes the greater challenge. An EMS positioned as an opportunity to share resources to research and build community-based resilience plans could be a value add in a location-based scenario. Sweden had a project years ago where a common business challenge brought small businesses together to share costs related to EMS development, including a common certification process. There was a similar effort with some wineries in New Zealand. Communication with my contacts in both these projects suggested that sharing costs to build systems was valued, whereas the continuance of a cooperative venture to cover the costs of certification was insufficient to justify the costs. Is there a new opportunity to change that scenario? However, cooperation to share the costs and demands of building an EMS offers the potential to encourage new business models. Smart city initiatives enabled by the densification of and trend towards urban areas may offer another opportunity to share the costs and resource needs of small businesses. Smart cities use different types of electronic data collection sensors to populate databases, which can be used to manage assets and resources efficiently. This includes data collected from citizens, devices, and assets that is processed and analyzed to monitor and manage traffic and transportation systems, power plants, water supply networks, waste management, law enforcement, information systems, schools, libraries, hospitals, and other community services. Could small businesses leverage the value of an EMS to enable a community-based systems approach, or perhaps more aptly stated as a community ecosystem? How can the audit community help this? Well, each community or company develops its own EMS to reflect its unique business situation. By working together, there is the opportunity to reduce costs, enable real-time responses, and simplify transactions between a network of small business and the governance organizations responsible for community services. It's also an opportunity to collaborate and tackle some of the more challenging Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. The SDGs, like ISO, are not part of the small business lexicon. Meeting the SDGs will not be achieved with a business as usual scenario. In no way will any country meet the SDGs without the involvement of small business. According to a global report that present an SDG index and dashboards, the greatest challenges exist on climate change, which is the 13th SDG, ecosystem conservation, which represents 14 and 15, and sustainable consumption and production, or SDG 12. Not only do we all have to think in innovative ways, we need to ensure that our EMS supports innovative actions and not a tightly constructed bureaucratic process. We need to consider how to make SDGs palatable for the small business owner's dinner plate. This offers us a chance to rethink an EMS as part of an innovative IT opportunity. A more recent innovation is the emergence of a distributed ledger technology, or DLT. Many of you will have heard about Bitcoin, one of blockchain's earliest examples. Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency has been enjoying an exciting ride in the stock market. There are risks associated with it, and Bitcoin is seen as a fairly greedy user of carbon to enable transactions. However, blockchain technology is evolving. I want to make sure that we're on the same page in terms of our understanding of these distributed ledger networks. A blockchain is a distributed database that is continuously updated and verified by its users. Each added block of data is chained and becomes part of a growing list of records under the surveillance of network members. This technology enables the transfer of assets and the recording of transactions through a secure database. Blockchain technology can be used to develop peer-to-peer trade of clean energy for certified and facilitated transactions among consumers or small business in a peer-to-peer or B2B exchange. Blockchain technology could support climate change by strengthening reporting and verification of the impacts of climate change, making it easier to report and eliminating the possibility of double counting. It could help improve transparency, traceability, and cost effectiveness of climate change. It could build trust among climate actors, enabling the opportunity for platforms to support peer-to-peer renewable energy trade. Consumers, SMEs, and large companies could buy, sell, or exchange renewable energy with each other using tokens or tradable digital assets representing a certain quantity of energy production. This will help drive new business models. It can also help make incentive mechanisms for climate action accessible to the poorest, which may help developing countries take on a stronger role in the international policy and action supporting mobilization of green finance, including crowdfunding and peer-to-peer financial transactions. A cooperative adoption of EMS in conjunction with these opportunities that blockchain may provide could enable new business models and support the adoption of innovative products and services, including new ways of looking at certification or other conformity assessment options. Some of these will be labeled by larger organizations and state institutions as disruptive technologies. But what can stakeholders, or what we call interested parties in the standard, do to close the gap between the current situation and the opportunity to help small business? What can auditors do? Given the standard that was passed in 2015, and negotiators are constrained by the standardized framework that many of us know as the high-level structure, or HLS, fixing the standard is a labor-intensive, drawn-out process. Fixing the standard itself is a 5-year activity, which will probably start soon. However, this time frame completely misses the needs of small business who need help now. I note there's been some valiant efforts by some experts to develop guidance documents to make the standard appear less onerous, but they are fraught with the same challenges underlying constraints. The idea of breaking a complicated process into bits and bytes has proven unsatisfactory. An elephant, even in small pieces, still requires an enormous appetite for a really big freezer and a dedicated appetite. Feedback from the small business community has basically said that the guidance document 14,005 is too complicated. So thanks, but no thanks. This means that ISO 14,001, as it is currently written and marketed, does not address the needs of small business. It is unlikely that the next generation of environmental management system standards under ISO is going to overcome this challenge. Breaking a standard into a staged or phased implementation, and where the focus is on compliance with legal requirements, has proven unsuccessful in the research and case studies I have read. Without emphasizing and maintaining the goal of having a robust, credible, and reliable system, it's also contrary to the way systems operate. For the sum of the whole is always greater than its parts. And in the case of EMS, the product of the whole is greater than its parts. Perhaps we should have a parallel standards development process for small business, one that aligns with ISO, but expressly addresses the resource limitations of small business. Other development processes do exist now. These operate as online platforms where drafts can be posted and any stakeholder can participate. Perhaps some auditors should do that as well. Some are funded so that the participation is free. Others are offered on a pay-to-play basis, and the fee is often very modest. These platforms offer any interested party the option to log on, review, and comment. Integration of comments is done in a transparent way. There's no need for meetings, and the carbon footprint of this development process is considerably lower than the quarterly meetings that take negotiators around the world for ISO meetings. Writing a standard in plain language is important, and this applies to any standard, ISO or other. If you have the opportunity to talk to small business, ask them to share the specific changes that they would like to see in EMS, and for those of you who have spent time with small business. And I invite you to share these comments with me and your national mirror bodies. Developing other tools to enhance the understanding of an EMS written for small business by small business may attract a small percentage of the informed but unwilling to adopt. This could include guides that explains tools to meet elements of the standards such as life cycle thinking, significance, risks, and opportunities. Tools could also include apps like the eco marker that help with aspects, significance, risks, and opportunities, and other elements geared towards compliance issues, both legal and other. There are efforts like this underway, but they are not marketed as ISO 14001 tools, as ISO itself is still not a strong market attraction for them. From time to time, have a look on the internet and see if you can find tools designed for small business and other fields, and think how they might be adapted for EMS. One document, called Going for the Green, was developed in Canada specifically for the purpose of helping small business in the manufacturing sector adopt better management practices. The small business owners were the target market. Other elements of an EMS before in management review were given more visual real estate. While it did not refer to ISO except in an oblique manner, it enabled a small business to master and build 80% of an EMS. The first month Going for the Green was posted on the CFIB website. CFIB recorded over 3,000 downloads. At the height of its popularity, it had an average of 860 downloads a day without marketing support or communication strategy. The guide is currently being modernized using an engagement process to get input from small business. In Canada, a group of large businesses are working together to address the challenges facing their own organizations. When Going for the Green is ready for the market, these large companies are going to advise their supply chains of the value of the new guide. Like many jurisdictions, there is a shift underway in Canada to include more standards and regulations. While supporting standards as a way to enhance the adoption of better environmental management practices should be applauded, the devil is most certainly in the details. The culture of governments is largely bureaucratic and lethargic in comparison to the culture of small business, which is by nature and necessity flexible and energetic. Regulation, a powerful tool used by governments, is often the first tool chosen from other forms of government action. However, if the application of standards and regulations is not carefully considered, it could end adding cost and further undermining productivity. And the ISO brand could be undermined. The audit community could be very useful in providing policymakers and regulators insight on how this relationship could be enhanced. Regulations are not the only mechanism for enhancing the diffusion of standards. Consider the analogy between tools in a toolbox and instruments as options for government's policy to demonstrate this point. If all you have is a hammer to work with, you're going to look for things that you can use the hammer with and use the hammer for everything you find. Friend's father always called a hammer a hitter. He seems to have hit on something here. If legislation is the only tool government uses, it will deal with every public policy issue by passing yet another law. It will be important for those involved in this process to truly understand the needs of small business and the barriers they face in order to promote the adoption of robust, credible, and reliable EMS. Standards are not the same thing as regulation. They are much more flexible. And it'll be very important to craft this relationship so as not to merely transfer costs from the public purse to the private sector, or worse, add cost. Sharing what works and what has not worked could provide all those involved with greater insight. So let me summarize my presentation to say that while we face many challenges related to small business standards, I am confident that innovative thinking and initiatives needed will emerge. What role will ISO play? Are there other options? What role can you play in helping small business? Well, my friends, that will depend if the shoe fits. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. This ends today's presentation. Thanks for attending.